welcome to Viewpoint. My name is Vladimir Sulup, and to discuss the visa-free laws currently being adopted by Ukrainian Parliament, joining us now is the Executive Director of Anti-Corruption Action Center, Ms. Daria Kalenuik. Ms. Kalenuik, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
Ms. Kalenuik, your Anti-Corruption Action Center was a part of the working group to draft the laws which are currently being adopted by the Parliament, the so-called anti-corruption laws or the visa-free laws. And you were responsible for drafting the asset recovery, the laws dealing with asset recovery. So can you tell us how long did it take you to draft these laws, to work on these laws, and how did the work go up until the laws went to the Parliament?
Well, actually, all anti-corruption laws voted 2 days ago in Parliament, they are all about asset recovery. I'm not the only author. I was engaged in the elaboration of these laws, but they were elaborated by government, by General Prosecution Office. There were a lot of international experts engaged, let's say OECD, and all these laws were based on the assessment what Ukraine needs to improve its asset recovery regime. And it's obvious that what exists now doesn't work. We have a number, and this number is about $350, which were recovered to budget of Ukraine as a process of corruption for half a year. So within half a year, in 2015, we recovered only $350, not $350,000, but $350. It's nonsense. Something is absolutely wrong in the system of asset recovery. Therefore, our Anti-Corruption Action Center, our organization, was talking to a lot of practitioners in Ukraine, to General Prosecution Office, to investigators, to Ministry of Justice. We talked to international experts and figured out what are we lacking. And then after we figured it out, we held international conference on asset recovery in April, and afterwards a lot of results of this conference were put into the concept for asset recovery package of laws produced by government and presented in Parliament.
So basically there was a lot of work done prior to drafting the laws, but in Ukraine the laws have a tendency of changing their contents from the moment they get from whoever drafted them to the Parliament. And obviously one of the most controversial laws was the law on the National Agency on Asset Recovery. The previous week, the Parliament, it was voted by the Parliament, and it was not approved by the Parliament because there was a provision that 25% of the assets recovered by the agency will be remained for the agency. So can you tell us, was that your recommendation, or it just got there on the way from your desk to the Parliament?
25% would go to the budget, but the special fund in the budget, which would dedicate it to a set of directions. So it would fund protection for whistleblowers, protection for witnesses, other needs of criminal justice. And it's a general international practice when process of crime recovered are being used directly to fight crime.
So basically this provision was introduced in the initial draft by
It was introduced in initial draft. It was welcomed by international experts. It was assessed very positively by the Department of Justice in the US.
So how can you respond to this criticism by a lot of MPs that this is again a loophole for corruption, again 1/4 of the assets will remain with the agency, nobody will control the agency? How do you respond to this critic?
It's not in the agency, it will be in the budget, but will be dedicated to very particular purpose. And there are 4 or 5 purposes for which the assets could be used.
Daria, in your opinion, why there was so huge criticism?
They were looking for a very simple reason, very populistic reason, why they could say they don't want to vote for this law. They told, okay, it's a special fund, it means that it's a kind of 25% bribe. And it was myth spread within the Parliament and in society, which was...
And all the media immediately picked it up.
Yeah, and which was used, to kill the law. But this special fund is additional tool to control how the money are spent. The money which are recovered from corruption shouldn't be stolen again. And our international partners, the Americans and the people from the EU, they told that, if we want to recover assets to Ukraine, we want to make sure that they are not stolen again. And they told privately that, we don't trust that the budget, which has now been, non-clearly transparent, will not eat this money and that this money will not be stolen again. Therefore, this special fund is supposed to guarantee additional independence, and all spending of this national fund, special fund, would be controlled, audited and reported annually. But anyway, we shouldn't talk about that anymore because all this special fund was cancelled by Parliament.
Okay, this was actually my next question. Now that this provision was removed from the law,
yep.
From the draft was voted into the law on Tuesday. What is your reaction to this? Did this removal of this provision completely ruin the essence of the law? Basically, that the National Commission will be now, the National Agency will be now again dependent on the other budget costs for its existence, for paying the salary to its...
Well, the special fund would not mean paying the salaries, and it was manipulated. No salaries from special fund. But special fund would fund...
Okay, it could have used this money for its own operations. So now that the agency will not have this money and will be totally dependent on the government, does this undermine the existence and the effective work of this agency?
At least it doesn't harm to the existing regime. But there is another provision which was introduced, and this provision deprives agency from part of its functions, huge part of its functions. And I'm talking about management of seized and confiscated assets, management of seized assets. So now when assets are seized, they are not yet confiscated, but for example, court says that the owner cannot use these assets, they are seized, and someone has to manage them and to ensure that they are not losing their value. And this someone right now in Ukraine are judges and prosecutors. And there are a lot of corruption schemes on the management of these seized assets implemented by prosecutors and judges. First of all, we can't control how they evaluate these assets. We can't control how they engage third parties to manage these assets. We can't control how they assess them and then sell them, and if they can lose their value. So we wanted to take away this function from prosecutors and judges, which is not connected to investigations, and give it to the special agency with strong guarantees of independence, with additional tools to control, to make sure that the agency manages them well and properly. And it was...
Is it supposed to be the same agency on recovery of assets?
Yeah,
so this agency should both recover and manage assets?
Yeah, it's, we call it ARO-AMA, Asset Recovery Office, Asset Management Office, in the meaning of the EU directives. And, but unfortunately, there were a lot of MPs who started to claim that, you violate rights, property rights, when you give these tools to the separate agency. But they couldn't hear us that, listen, this is already happening, and these are prosecutors and judges whom you say are corrupt, who manage these assets. Why would you want to leave this function to them? If the EU, for example, directives say that there should be a separate agencies on that. But we couldn't convince them, so they killed this function.
Daria, and again, because the Ukrainian laws and Ukrainian drafts have a tendency of changing, even inside the parliament, did you get a chance to review the draft which was approved by the parliament? And do you have an opinion whether the draft actually corresponds to what was required by the EU from Ukraine? Because when we were talking to the EU representative on the same day when the law was adopted, they say, well, it's fine that the law has been adopted, but now we need to get the consolidated texts of all the anti-corruption laws. We need our experts need to go through them to review them, and only then we can conclude whether this is something we were expecting from Ukraine. From your standpoint, from your opinion, the contents of the laws of the text which have already been adopted, is this something which EU was expecting from Ukraine?
Well, no one yet seen the final text. They are not available yet. So in regards to ARO-AMA, I think there will be a lot of critics from the EU that, listen, we were expecting to have asset management office, but you killed the management. So there most likely there will be critics. But this law can be passed and then repaired, with time. So there could be amendments done. We could start launching the agency. But there are two more draft laws which couldn't be repaired. And this is law on seizure and special confiscation. So these laws harm existing regime. So they are doing worse than it's happening now. And what was the purpose of seizure law? The purpose was to make it clear what sort of evidence should provide prosecutor for a purpose of seizure assets, and the law divided. There are two.
Daria, very
two
briefly, do you think this is a deal breaker for the EU? Do you think the EU, once they review these laws, say, sorry guys, this is not something we're expecting?
Well, you already told that the governmental laws on asset recovery, they corresponded to the minimum requirements of the EU. And if they read the law and see that it harms to the existing regime, it wouldn't be minimum. It wouldn't be back,
below the minimum.
It would be step back of the existing regime. And I think that this law on seizure should be vetted by president. If president wants, if president doesn't want to shame, the Ukraine.
Understood. Well, it looks like some very tricky things happening in Ukrainian parliament. Daria, many thanks for finding the time to come and talk to us and share your insight. This has been Volodymyr Sulu for Viewpoint, together with the Executive Director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, talking about the anti-corruption laws currently being adopted by Ukrainian parliament to get the visa-free regime for Ukraine. Thank you for watching us.